It begins in the middle of a normal morning, in the kind of quiet routine that no one ever expects to be interrupted. You are standing in a crowded subway car, surrounded by strangers, half focused on your phone, half aware of the movement around you. The train hums, the doors close, and everything feels exactly as it always has, until something breaks, not outside, inside. At first, it feels like a sudden rush of noise, like multiple voices overlapping in a way that does not make sense. You look up, expecting to hear people speaking, arguing, reacting to something you cannot yet see. But no one is talking. Their mouths are closed, their faces calm, and yet, the voices are there. I'm going to be late. I hate this job. Why is he looking at me? I need to remember to call her. The thoughts hit you all at once. Layered, chaotic, impossible to separate. You turn your head quickly, trying to find the source, trying to match the voices to the people around you. But the sound is not coming from them. It is coming from everywhere, from inside your head. You freeze. For a moment, you think you are losing control, that something inside your mind has snapped, that you are hearing things that do not exist. Your breathing changes, your focus narrows, and you try to block it out to force silence back into place. But the more you try, the louder it becomes. A constant stream of thoughts, each one distinct, each one clearly not your own. The woman next to you shifts slightly. I hope no one notices. A man across the car stares at the floor. I shouldn't have said that. A teenager near the door glances at his reflection. I look tired. The realization hits slowly, but when it does, it is impossible to ignore. These are not sounds. They are thoughts, and you are hearing all of them. Across the world, the same moment unfolds. People stop in the middle of conversations, distracted by voices that should not exist. Drivers hesitate on the road, overwhelmed by a sudden flood of internal noise that is not their own. Workers sit at their desks, unable to focus as the thoughts of everyone around them begin to overlap, creating a constant, unavoidable pressure inside their minds. First, panic spreads quickly, not because of what people hear, but because they cannot stop hearing it. There is no switch, no control, no way to separate your own thoughts from the ones around you. They come all at once, blending together, rising and falling in intensity depending on how many people are nearby. Crowded places become unbearable. Cities feel overwhelming. Even a small room with a few people turns into a storm of internal voices, each one carrying its own worries, distractions, impulses, and secrets. Within hours, the world begins to change. People leave public spaces not out of fear, but out of necessity. The noise inside their heads becomes too much to handle. Streets empty, offices clear, transportation slows as individuals seek distance, silence. Any place where fewer minds mean fewer thoughts. Isolation becomes the only form of relief. But even in isolation, the problem remains. Because the moment another person enters your space, the noise returns. Communication breaks down almost immediately. Conversations become difficult not because people cannot speak, but because they cannot focus. When someone talks to you, you do not just hear their words. You hear everything behind those words. I'm pretending to listen. I don't agree with this. I want this to end. The spoken conversation becomes only one layer, almost irrelevant compared to the constant stream of unfiltered thoughts that accompany it. And that destroys something fundamental: trust, because people were never meant to hear each other like this. Thoughts are not decisions. They are not always true. They are not always consistent. But now they are exposed in real time. A person can say one thing and think something completely different at the same moment, and both are equally visible. Relationships begin to fracture under the pressure. A couple sits together in silence, overwhelmed not by what they say, but by what they hear. I'm annoyed. I still love them. I wish things were different. I don't want to hurt them. The thoughts come one after another, layered, contradictory, impossible to separate into a single truth. And that creates confusion, because people no longer know which thought represents reality. The first one, the second, all of them? Friendships face the same challenge. People begin to realize that the mind is not stable, not clean, not consistent. It is a constant flow of ideas, reactions, judgments, and impulses that shift from moment to moment. And hearing that flow in others becomes overwhelming, because it reveals something uncomfortable, that no one is as simple as they appear. At the same time, the world of work collapses into noise. Offices become almost unusable environments. Meetings turn into chaos, not externally, but internally. Every participant hears not only the discussion, but the thoughts of everyone involved. This is pointless. They don't understand. I need to leave. I'm bored. Focus becomes nearly impossible. Decisions become slower, not because people lack information, but because they have too much of it. Governments struggle even more. Leaders cannot hold private discussions. Every meeting becomes transparent in the worst possible way. Strategies, doubts, disagreements, all become audible to everyone present, and sometimes beyond, because proximity is enough. Walls do not stop thoughts. Distance becomes the only barrier. Security as it once existed disappears, not because information is stolen, but because it is heard, instantly and uncontrollably. At the same time, something deeper begins to happen inside individuals. The sense of self begins to blur, because when you are constantly hearing other thoughts, your own begin to feel less distinct. It becomes harder to separate what you are thinking from what you are hearing. Ideas overlap, mix, influence each other in ways that are difficult to track. People begin to question their own minds. Is this my thought? Or did I hear it? The boundary between self and others weakens, and that creates a new kind of anxiety, not fear of others, but fear of losing control over your own identity. As the first day comes to an end, as people retreat into smaller spaces, seeking quiet, seeking distance, seeking any form of relief, one realization becomes impossible to ignore. The human mind was never meant to be shared like this. Not constantly, not without control, because thoughts are not designed to be heard. They are designed to be private, messy, incomplete, and without that privacy, everything becomes louder, more confusing, more overwhelming, until even silence feels impossible to find. It does not become easier. That is the first thing people realize after the initial shock fades. There is no adjustment period where the noise softens, no natural adaptation that filters the constant stream of toujours mercifully into something manageable. If anything, it becomes more difficult, more exhausting, more invasive with each passing day, because the brain was never designed to process this much. At first, people try to cope. They isolate themselves, moving away from crowds, seeking places where fewer minds mean fewer voices. Cities begin to empty as individuals spread out, trying to create distance between themselves and others. Public spaces lose their purpose. Transportation slows, workplaces shut down or move into smaller, controlled environments. Silence becomes the most valuable resource in the world. But even silence is imperfect, because no one can truly be alone forever. And the moment another person enters your range, the noise returns. People begin to measure distance not in meters, but in thoughts. How far do you need to be from someone before their mind becomes quiet? How many people can you be around before it becomes unbearable? New habits form quickly. People avoid eye contact not because it changes anything, but because it feels like it should. They limit interaction, reduce communication, keep conversations short and purposeful, because the longer you stay, the more you hear. And what you hear changes everything, because over time, the content of thoughts becomes less shocking, but more revealing. At first, people are overwhelmed by the volume. Then they begin to understand the patterns. They realize that most thoughts are not meaningful. They are repetitive, random, contradictory. I need to eat. I should work. I don't want to be here. I forgot something. The human mind, when exposed fully, is not profound. It is noisy, and that realization shifts how people see each other, because the image of others as stable, consistent individuals begins to break. Everyone becomes fragmented, not one clear personality, but a constant flow of changing ideas, and that creates distance, not physical, but psychological. People begin to detach from each other, not out of dislike, but out of overload. It becomes easier to see others as systems of thoughts rather than as individuals. Empathy changes, not disappearing, but transforming into something more abstract, less emotional, because it is difficult to connect deeply when you are hearing everything. At the same time, something unexpected begins to emerge. Control, not over others, but over the self. People realize that while they cannot stop hearing thoughts, they can influence what others hear from them. This leads to a new form of discipline. Individuals begin to train their minds, learning how to focus, how to reduce internal noise, how to shape their thinking into something more controlled, more intentional. Meditation becomes essential, not as a luxury, but as survival. Those who master it create a form of quiet around themselves. Their thoughts become slower, clearer, less chaotic, making them easier to be around. Others begin to seek them out, not for conversation, but for relief, because being near a quiet mind feels like silence. And in a world full of noise, that is rare. This creates a new kind of social structure, not based on wealth, not based on power, but based on mental clarity. Those who can control their thoughts become valuable, respected, even followed. They create spaces where others can exist with less pressure, less noise, less confusion. But not everyone can achieve this. For many, the mind remains uncontrolled, chaotic, constantly producing thoughts that cannot be stopped. And for them, life becomes overwhelming in a different way, because now their inner world is not just theirs. It is shared, constantly, and that exposure creates a new form of vulnerability. People become afraid of their own thoughts, not because they are dangerous, but because they are visible. This leads to a deeper transformation. The mind begins to change. Over time, people naturally reduce unnecessary thoughts. The brain adapts, becoming more efficient, more selective, producing fewer random ideas. Not through effort, but through pressure. Because every thought has consequences, and that pressure shapes thinking itself. Creativity begins to shift, not disappearing, but becoming more controlled, less chaotic, more structured, because chaotic thinking is difficult to live with in a shared environment. At the same time, communication evolves. Words become less important, because thoughts are already present. People begin to rely on fewer spoken interactions, focusing instead on shared understanding that happens without language. Conversations shorten, becoming confirmations rather than explanations. You already know. Yes, this simplicity creates efficiency, but it also removes something, expression, because speaking was not just about sharing information. It was about shaping it. Now that shaping is gone, and what remains is raw, immediate, unfiltered. As months pass, society begins to stabilize in a new form. Cities reorganize into quieter zones. Workplaces adapt to smaller groups. Communities form around mental discipline rather than physical location. The world does not return to what it was. It becomes something else. A place where privacy is not physical but mental. Where identity is not defined by what you say, but by what you think. And where silence is the highest form of control. But even in this new balance, something remains. A question. Because while people learn to manage the noise, to reduce it, to live within it, they never fully escape it. There is always something, the thought, a voice, presence, and that constant awareness begins to change how people understand themselves. Because for the first time, the boundary between individuals is no longer clear. Thoughts overlap, influence spreads, ideas move from one mind to another without permission, without intention, simply through proximity. And slowly, something begins to happen. The difference between my thought and your thought becomes harder to